JazzWax was started as a dare. Back in 2007, I was actually doing a lot of commercial writing for major real estate companies in New York. When I wasn't doing corporate work, I was getting together with Terry Teachout, who is the late critic, drama critic, critic at large at the Wall Street Journal. I hadn't been working with the Wall Street Journal yet. Since 1996, we had been getting together 3 hours on Saturday once a quarter just to listen to jazz, and that's all we were doing. At one point in 2007, he was telling me that he was going to be named theater critic, and he said to me, "You got to start a blog." And I said, "I don't have time to start a blog, Terry." I said, "I'm busy." And he goes, "I'm nobody's busier than I am," he said. "Yeah, and I blog. It's essential. It's starting out. It had just started out, um, and he insisted that I do that. It was sort of a dare. Terry was sort of daring me to not whine about it and don't pretend to be busier than he is. He knew something that I didn't at that point, which is that I shouldn't have been doing commercial corporate work. He knew there was something more there. I didn't know that yet, but he said, "Start it." I said, "Fine. August 3rd, I will start blogging. I will have a name for the blog, and I will start posting." He goes, "Great." So I came up with JazzWax as a name because it seemed to have that double entendre of jazz wax, meaning to wax on and on, to get into some sort of discourse about something. And also because wax was one of those Runyon-esque names for records in Variety and Billboard in the headlines back in the 1940s. So it seemed to work. It was available. I took it. And I started on August 3rd and didn't stop. What I also said to myself is I've got to set myself apart. And the two things that set me apart, I knew that set me apart, is the ability to crank out content 6 days a week, 5 to 6 days a week. Others were at the time were posting once a week, twice a week, the max. So I knew that posting 6 days a week was going to be a standout. And I also knew that my interview skills were sharp, and they were warm, they were sensitive, they were engaging. By interviewing people who interested me in jazz legends, tracking down jazz legends, obscure jazz legends, that this would give the reader something more than just me rambling about something. So those were the two things that I used to stand out, set myself apart. There weren't that many jazz blogs at that time. There were a couple, but it wasn't like it is today. So people were hungry for it, and it turned out global people were hungry for it. I wanted it to be engaging, and I wanted it to be so that when readers read it, they would want to subscribe and come back daily, so that I was basically carrying on a daily conversation with them and that they would enjoy that. My parents moved us from New York City, from Manhattan to northern Westchester in 1969. I was 13. My brother took to it immediately. I mean, he just loved being in the country. I hated it, couldn't stand it. Jazz recordings became my best friend. I don't know how else to put it. I would take the train into the city and go to the major record stores in the city and buy vinyl. And those became things that I studied very carefully and spent many hours listening to. I developed a very large collection of records, as you can imagine. And as a result, from spending enormous amounts of time in record stores going through the bins, I pretty much knew everything that was coming out. I knew everything that had come out. Things that I couldn't get were unaffordable. It's not until the CD era that Blue Notes were being reissued, and suddenly a generation or generations discovered all of this music that they didn't know about. If there are individuals who recorded a lot, were prolific recorders, then I love to go onto discographies and find albums that are barely known. And when I find a barely known album, and it's a great album, because I don't post on junk. I never posted on junk. But when I found a great album that was little known, it was terrific to post about it and sort of drill down and get the research done and, feature it. A lot of times so much is on YouTube. So very often there'd be at least tracks to that rare album, or the full album would be up. Someone knew about it and put up the whole thing. It's personal knowledge, and it's also a lot of research in the right places to find obscure recordings. I mean, the whole goal is to blow the reader's mind for me. I had been groomed to love jazz through TV crime music or detective music, Mannix, Mission Impossible. Most of the jazz guys, especially in Hollywood and in New York, rolled into TV work in the 1960s. Arrangers were doing incredible things for television. Almost every TV show in the 1960s has a big band and an arrangement and great musicians on it. You know, it's not until the 70s where TV shows start to get a flavor of rock in there too. For me, there were so many interesting, obscure people on records that I really was very curious about, like McCusick and Danny Bank and Saul Schlinger. I mean, these people were turning up on albums all over the place. You know, everything I'd pick up, you know, in the band would be these guys, and the big bands that these guys would be there. And I just, as a journalist, you know, I started at the New York Times. So for me, journalism was always part of what I did. You know, it was just a matter of asking around, getting the phone number, calling them up, and asking if I could interview them and interviewing them, but on my terms. You know, I wanted it just to be not a torturous experience for the reader, but just enough that the reader got a sense of who this person was, how they grew up, and how they wound up in music, and you know what some of the albums they recorded were all about. And that turned out to be a gold mine because these guys had played with everybody. They had great stories. And then the interviews would turn into mini interviews on other subjects. You know, like I never knew anything about the Charlie Parker with Voices session. Old folks, you know, the vocal session that he did for Verve, and Hal McCusick was there. He, you know, told me everything about that session and why so many takes were needed and what happened there. And that's the kind of stuff I live for, and that's the kind of stuff readers really appreciated. Insights into recordings that couldn't have come from anybody else except eyewitnesses. And the extra information and the questions you need to ask to extract that information, and the stupid questions you have to ask to get the great answers. For instance, on that Voices session, you know, I said to Hal, why were so many takes needed? And he goes, well, listen to it again. There were too many voices. I said, you know, it's true. You can't distinguish. He goes, all we needed were three. I think Dave Lambert brought like seven to the session. And it was just too much. You couldn't hear the individual chords of what the vocalists were trying to do. And then he said, the other thing is, Max Roach seemed to not like the commercial feeling of that. And he kept playing really fast in the first six takes. You know, what he was doing was making it so the singers would screw up because Charlie Parker would start playing fast, but the singers couldn't keep up. And it wasn't until, I don't know, take seven or whatever it was, where Norman Granz finally slowed things down. Max slowed things down, and they had a master take. But those kinds of things, you can't get those kinds of things unless you talk to an eyewitness who is there, who also feels liberated from Max being angry at him. If Max was still alive and I did that interview, I never would have found that out. You know, when the subject feels safe to be able to talk about something like that, it's just extraordinary what you get. And JazzWax is so filled with that. I mean, there were so many interviews, so many posts that you never would have gotten otherwise. And at the end of the day, it not only humanizes these people, for many jazz listeners, they're gods, right? You know, wow, Charlie Parker and Lester Young and Max Roach. To hear that Max didn't like the commercial aspect of it, and that his way of getting back was to play really fast and, you know, make it hard for the singers to do their thing. It's kind of interesting. Why? Because drama is important. Drama is what we live for. Drama is the essence. It's the sugar in the soda. It's the essence of what makes a story great. Drama. If there's no drama in a story, it's dull. It's just not interesting. So drama, there's a lot of drama in jazz, and I was able to tease a lot of that out through these interviews. The beauty about JazzWax is it's not about me. I always felt that if I disappeared and the reader had a relationship with what was being said, that it was going to be a much stronger bond than if I were strutting around during my post and bragging about things or boasting or showing off or any of that stuff. So from the start, my mindset was to post and kind of disappear. Let the reader have a very deep and meaningful relationship with the art, with the music. And if they learn something or they feel something, then it would be a win-win. And that's what happened. JazzWax became the best friend of thousands of readers. JazzWax is so important to me. I have it with my muffin and coffee in the morning. It's like a friend who stops over with their dog to talk for a couple of minutes, and we play some music. So it has had a very strong connection with readers. I think fundamentally because I've given them a daily fix of great music and explanation as to why something's important. And I worked hard to disappear. I mean, they know it's me. I mean, don't get me wrong. They know I'm the one doing this. But what I'm saying to you is their relationship, whether they know it or not, is not with me. Their relationship is with what's being said and presented.